I'm reading today from Rays of the One Light. These are commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Kriyananda and based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Today's topic is, does God hide the truth? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. In last week's reading, we saw that the great masters themselves counseled discretion in the dissemination of truth. The counter-argument is sometimes made, but the Lord doesn't hide. He reveals His beauty in the sunset, His tender sympathy in the rain, His wrath in the thunder, His restless energy in the brooks, His power in the sunlight. There are exoteric truths, and there are also esoteric truths. There is that which is revealed impersonally and left up to us to interpret, such as the thunder, as our perception of divine wrath, the rain, and our perception of it as God's sympathy. But behind even God's most open expressions, there lies impenetrable mystery. The wind blows where it will, says Jesus in the Gospel of St. John. You hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. And Sri Krishna says in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, by me the whole vast universe of things is spread abroad. By me the unmanifest. In me are all existences contained, not I in them. God's hidden reality cannot be understood by the reasoning faculty. India's Sankhya philosophy states frankly, Ishwar Ashita, God is not provable. A willingness to seek the underlying reality behind appearances is essential for those who would know God. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Such a pleasure to take off the mask. Maybe someday we'll be able to do it completely. I was reminded when the microphone fell over earlier this morning of Swami Kriyananda's sense of humor. I remember sitting with him with a group of people at his house, and this was when he just had the little dome of Crystal Hermitage. All the vast rest of it hadn't been built yet. It was just this little tiny dome. So the kitchen was just right there. And someone was making tea in the kitchen, and they broke a cup. Big clattering crash. And Swami was just sitting in his chair, and he very calmly said, "Don't break the furniture," with this fake Italian accent. Don't break the furniture. And I loved being around him because he always had that sense of fun, always had that lightness of spirit. And that's what we need to emulate in our lives. Going through life without a sense of humor is torture. Why would we do that? That's one of the reasons that he loved P.G. Wodehouse, because P.G. Wodehouse, the great English humorist, had such a marvelous sense of fun. And that's what we need to cultivate in our lives. God hides the truth, but he hides it everywhere. And if we can see joy everywhere, then we have that touch of God. In today's reading, Swami quotes Jesus as saying, "The wind blows where it will. You hear the sound of it, but you don't know where it's coming from or where it's going." And Yogananda explained that this means that God cannot be contained by dogmas or rules or our conception of what God is. God is far, far beyond anything that we can think of about him. And so he's not contained by our little minds, what we think, or rules and regulations of any religion. He's not bound by any of that. And could you open up that thing for me? Thank you. And the more that we can attune ourselves to what God is, then the more we feel his love, his wisdom nourishing us on a very deep level. Thank you. The Bhagavad Gita also talks about this same thing. By me the whole vast universe of things is spread abroad. By me the unmanifest, in me all existences are contained, but not I in them. So what this is saying is that our souls, our existence, is within God, but God is not limited to that. Yogananda explains that the little wave in the ocean is made up entirely of salt water, of ocean water. But it can't say that I am the vast ocean. It's just the little wave. The vast ocean is that wave. So God is not limited to our little souls, but our soul is part of God. It can't exist without God. God made everything out of himself. So God is not provable, so the scriptures say, but that means God is not provable in an outward way, inwardly. If we look within, God is infinitely provable. There's a beautiful passage in the autobiography of a yogi in which Sri Yukteswar finally grants Yogananda the vision of cosmic consciousness that Yogananda has been longing for his entire life. And afterwards, he's had this incredible vision. Sri Yukteswar hands him a broom and says, "Come, let us sweep the balcony floor and then we'll walk by the Ganges." He wanted him to stay in his body and not just be in ecstatic union with God all the time. He wanted to show him that there was work to be done, that he had to come to the West and help all of us and people, devotees all over the world. But in talking about that experience of cosmic consciousness, Sri Yukteswar says that after the mind is cleared of sensory obstacles, then God is proven to us in two ways. In deep meditation, after the mind is cleared of sensory obstacles, in meditation, one feels ever new joy. And Sri Yukteswar says this proves God's existence to us, and it is convincing to our very atoms. We won't be able to prove God. We aren't even sure about him until we get that experience. Convincing to our very atoms. And the other way, the twofold way, we experience this joy, and we also know that God is provable because we receive inner guidance that is always perfect to whatever difficulty is going on in our lives. So we have this proof of God. But we have to do that, clearing the mind of the sensory obstacles. And Yogananda, again, in talking about that cosmic experience, said afterwards, by daily stilling my thoughts, I could win release from this conviction that we are a body, that we are a mass of blood and flesh and traversing the hard soil of earth, he said. The breath and the restless mind are like storms which lash the ocean of light into waves of material forms. This is God, the way that God created the universe. Remember, God is unmoving. He's beyond vibratory creation. And the way he created was setting forth vibration through the sound of Om, creating positive and negative, creating all this vibratory creation. And that's why Sri Yukteswar says we have to go into the Om. That's why the Om technique of our path is so important. We have to, as Sri Yukteswar said, we have to be baptized in the river of Om and follow that sound back to the Creator. But this is that sensory obstacle, those sensory obstacles that we have to get rid of through meditation, breath and the restless mind. So what can we do? We can try to put some energy into our meditation, make it regular. I think one of the most important things about that we can do on the spiritual path is make our meditation practice absolutely bomb-proof. Every morning, every evening, and every day at noon if you can. Trying to practice the Hong Sa technique. Nothing could be simpler than watching the breath and chanting that mantra. Simple, but is it easy? Hardly. We need to put energy into it. Think of all the things we put energy into. Our house, our garden, our kids, our family, our pets, our job, our television. Think of all those things. We follow politics. We follow sports. Just so many, many, many things outwardly. Inwardly, we need to put equal and more energy into calming the mind. Why do we suffer in life? We suffer endlessly so that we can finally say nothing outwardly is going to satisfy me or help. We have to look within. God is waiting, saying, I'm here. Ask, and ye shall receive. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. God is waiting. And He will wait for all eternity until we finally turn away from all the things and all the desires and all the things that we want so badly. And when we get them, we go, what did I want this for? It's just cluttering up my life. Go for what is true. Go for that which gives you love, which gives you peace, which gives you calmness. Of all the ways that God can be experienced, sound is the easiest. That's why Yogananda said chanting is half the battle. If we can put our minds in sync with the chants that Yogananda gave us, they have heard thy name, which our dear friends were chanting this morning. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt, and lame. God is always there for us. Spiritual practice in India, one of the great ways of doing it is just practicing mantra, saying the name of God over and over and over. So simple, but we have to do it. We have to practice these teachings for them to work. When this reading of the words of Jesus talked about the wind blowing where it wills, and of such is the, how did he put it? So is everyone who is born of the Spirit. This means not only God in his invisible, unmanifested form, but also people who are one with God. They are not bound either by convention or by rules or by the laws of dogma. And they have a vibration that is so magnetic. I had the great blessing of working with Swami for a long time, and being in his presence was an incredible blessing. And you could feel his energy. Dharmadas tells us the story of being in a restaurant once, and he had his back to the door. There was no, there was soft music playing in the background, but he didn't hear anything. He didn't hear Swami speak. But when Swami walked into the restaurant, before he could even see him, Dharmadas sat up straight. Just that energy went up his spine. And that was often the way with Swamiji. He talked about being in the presence of Yogananda and how questions that were burning in his heart that he wanted to ask Master would just disappear when he was in Yogananda's presence. And that would often happen with Swamiji too. He would do a question and answer series, and he would say, people have questions, and maybe one or two little hands would go up, and then there wouldn't be any more. And Swami would, with his sense of humor, he would get this look on his face like a gangster and say, any more questions? just to try to lighten it up so people would be freer to try to ask questions. Gandhi, too, could walk into a room of squabbling politicians, all at each other's throats, but he had such a vibration of peace that all arguing would stop in his presence. So what can we do right now? For one thing, we can live in joy. The more we can affirm joy in our hearts, in our minds, the more we will feel God's joy. we had a party Friday night in the community, just at Master's Kitchen. Everyone's invited to our community meals. And we just had an exceptionally joyful time. There were only about 12 of us, but we stayed long past dinner. I think dinner starts at 6. I think I got home at 9 o'clock. It was just so much joy and laughing and I went home and meditated and just thought, what is it that devotees, they come together and there's just so much joy there. And I remembered this passage from the Gita, my devotees proclaiming me always, enlightening one another, are ever contented and joyful. The more we fill our minds with God, the more we interact with each other in that divine joy, the more life is worth living, and we can give so much more to this world if we live in that joy. Think of the anguish and all the sorrow that's happening in this world. We can't drown with it. We have to rise above it and live in that joy of God. And that is so magnetic that we can pull souls drowning in sorrow up into that light of God, into that joy.
This little passage talking about God being not provable reminds me of a video that I recorded probably now a couple years ago, relatively early in the pandemic when we were doing daily videos on YouTube. I posted one talking about the religion of atheism, and that, you can be just as dogmatically atheistic as you can ever be dogmatically religious. And I had not fully cognized how dynamically militant atheists can be. And so, evidently the title of it caught some attention from different ones, and they started commenting on YouTube in real time. And I responded for a while, and we went back and forth, talking about various possibilities. And ultimately it devolved into bad language, at which point I cut it off. It's no more comments. Okay, enough here. I mean, what was frustrating for these people, and one in particular, was that I would not agree with their interpretation. And their interpretation was, it's all meaningless. It's all absolutely pointless. It all just came about out of nothing. And it was like, it all came about out of intelligence. It all came out, I mean, you can think of it in a lot of different ways, but I wasn't going to go, same set of evidence, but I wasn't going to go there. And it was like, how can you be so stupid? How can anyway, and it went on and on from there. It went downhill from there. And at a certain point, I just had to say, okay, enough. I add my testimony to those who have gone before me that God, in fact, is not provable, and we are wasting our breath trying when people are determined in a certain way. But it's interesting, and to segue on Nirmala's point, that when we look at the world around us, it's not obvious. We have to look inside before we realize, before we feel that presence of God. Otherwise, there's always more to the story. There's always a bigger, broader view, a broader vision. And I remember this story that I read as a child, which I don't even remember the title of it now. I just remember the basic storyline of it, was that there was this boy in a school, and probably we were in, I don't know, I want to say third grade or something like that. And so it was a book about children, for children. And this boy didn't ever quite fit in. He was just a little odd. He was kind of quiet, and the other kids made fun of him, it was sort of typical thing. But he had this way about him. He was magnetic. And people were sort of drawn, a certain group were kind of drawn to him. And this one girl connected with him, and he said one day they were outside somewhere together, and he said, "Take my hand," and so she did. And actually, before that, she had seen him lift off the ground, and she was like, "Now I saw that. What is that about?" And he said, "Well, take my hand," and so they both went off the ground, and well, word gets around. I mean, other kids were like, they either didn't believe it or, I want to try, whatever. Well, anyone who took hands went off the ground, and they flew for a little while. And, of course, this was big news. But at a certain point, he said to the class, because people wanted to know, what is this about? He said, "Well, I'm not from here. I was given this gift. I'm actually not a person. I am the last of my species of a bird, and I need to find a mate, and I was given the opportunity to come here to find one, to take back with me, and if I could, then my species would continue, and if not, then I'm it, and that's the end." And I just was like, whoa, I was not expecting the story to go that way. It was like, wow. I mean, kids could fly, you read Harry Potter or you read whatever. It's like, there's all this, it's fascinating how in Dwapara Yuga, there's all this hero consciousness. There's all this superpower consciousness. It's all in here. It's all available to us. It's frankly quite a bit of a distraction, but while people are interested in it, okay, fine, people are interested in it. But it's a potential, and there's always more. It's one of the reasons that this lovely passage from the Bible in Proverbs, "Trust in the Lord with all thy heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding." And then it goes on, and it's beautiful. The "lean not unto thine own understanding" is a little bit of a tricky one, a little bit of a challenging one for yogis, because we value our own experience. We learn from our actual experience in the laboratory of life. Well, naturally our understanding is going to grow. But if we are leaning on it, then what happens sometimes is it grows in a direction that's unexpected, kind of like the river. The Ganges changes course every once in a while. Rivers will change course. Enough silt builds up and the river just suddenly goes shooting off in a different direction. You lean on your own understanding and you finally fall over if the understanding was not as broad or as deep as it could have been. I remember an experience with Swami Kriyananda many years ago, in which he had suggested something to me that was very inspiring, it was very expansive. I thought, wow, this is great. But it impacted some other people as well. And I sort of couldn't help myself but to say that at a certain point. And he took me to task for it. And he did it in a delightful way, but he was really strong with me. He was very firm with me. He said, "I don't even always know what I mean when I say something. How are you going to know?" Okay, fair point. He himself would allow for the fact that something might come out of his mouth in full sincerity. And a day later, an hour later, a month later, a year later, he might have a deeper understanding and say, okay, that was okay for the time, but now we're going to do this. Now we've gone a little further. Now we understand more. And how was I going to know? I didn't know yet. Well, that's how we learn. And Swamiji himself related an experience in which Yogananda had been talking about the potential of a trip to India. And the implication was that if he went, he would bring Swamiji with him. This is in the late 40s or early 50s. And Swamiji said, he kept kind of pestering Master a little bit about, have you got the guidance? Are we going to go? Is it going to happen? And Master said, I'm not inquisitive about these things. And Swamiji said, I love this little line from the path. He said, mentally, I tightened my belt of expectations. Not inquisitive about a trip to India? How can you not be inquisitive about a trip to India? Anyway, but then later he said, Master was waiting for guidance in a certain way, and he had told Swamiji not to say anything to anybody about the trip. Well, one of the brother monks said, I heard that this trip might happen, and, Swami said something, by way of, well, I'm not supposed to talk about it. And the fellow said, oh, well, I know all about it already, but I just wanted to hear it from you. And so Swami told him what he knew. And that was the guidance that Master needed to know that the trip was not supposed to happen. Now, you can imagine that Swami was pretty disappointed with himself for sort of blurting it out. How many times in our lives has something just come out? I was struck by the example from Yogananda's autobiography. He devotes a whole chapter to it, where Kashi is this student at the Ranchi school. Master's talking to the kids, and they're asking him, what will I do? Will I stay a renunciate? Will I get married? Blah, blah, blah. And Master's answering these questions. He was sort of playing the fortune teller in a sense. But this boy Kashi said, well, what will my fate be? And before he could even think, Yogananda said, you will be dead soon. And you want to end the satsang? That's a great way to end this. Just completely delete the energy, whatever was there. But he said the conviction forced itself out of him, just with irresistible force. Hell, this boy was, of course, completely devastated. And, he asked Yogananda, when I am reborn, you must find me and ensure that I get on the spiritual path. And you think about this, and Master said in the autobiography, I felt constrained to refuse this difficult request. But the boy wouldn't relent. For days and weeks afterwards, he pestered Master. And finally, through circumstances with the family forcibly removed him from the school at a certain point when Yogananda was gone. And he got cholera and he died. And Yogananda felt that he had to honor that request. And he had agreed to. He said, if the Lord will help me, then I will try. And he did find the guy. And I just absolutely love this. He goes to this house where he's convinced that this boy is about to be reborn. Knocks on the door, and the lady, the little serving girl, comes to the door, asks if the Master's home. He is home, and he comes. And Yogananda said, I asked him a question that was both pertinent and impertinent. Is your wife pregnant? and the man said, yes. Please tell me how you know my affairs. And then he goes on to explain this whole situation. So much of what we think of as our own is just one little glimpse, one in the fire ceremony, I was giving the example of this amazing space telescope, the James Webb telescope that's 1 million miles away from here, focuses on deep space and takes these incredible photographs. And if you held a grain of sand out here at arm's length and you looked through that like a lens and looked to what was beyond and took a photograph of it, that's one of the first images that came back. And there's just thousands of galaxies out there through this tiny little piece of the sky that would otherwise appear completely dark. That is the body of our own greater awareness. And even our consciousness is far beyond that. So what we think of as our little selves is so minute compared to the vastness of our cosmic nature. But we still have to work with the world right here and now, right as it is in front of us. And just simply recognize that the truth can be staring us right in the face. Swamiji described how in Romania, where he grew up as a child, oil had been discovered. Well, I mean, I think it had been discovered long before because it was oozing out of the ground and people would step in it and it would get stuck all over their boots. But the consciousness wasn't developed to think, okay, well, we could refine this, we can use this as fuel, we can, build all these machines, et cetera, et cetera. The consciousness was not there. The truth was sitting there, but the realization of what to do with it had not evolved. And so it is in our lives. Hence, we should always take what is presented to us as a possibility, not as yes, it's this or no, it's that, but Divine Mother, reveal. I love that there's a lovely chant, reveal, words very simple, reveal thyself, reveal thyself. And when we pray that way, I loved how, that's about as simple as you can go in a chant. But Swamiji's own prayer, someone had suggested, Swamiji, can we unite Ananda around a particular prayer that we practice every day when you've left the body? And Swamiji said, well, it's been many years since I prayed with words. You think about that. Pray without words. You go beyond all the possibility of confusion and limitation. Words can so easily be misunderstood anyway. Not between you and God particularly, but just they're a limitation. Let's go beyond all that limitation, just like the affirmation today of self-expansion. Go beyond all of that to realize the cosmic divine within.